In a world where Twitter leads the headlines and the 24-hour news cycle forces people to choose sides, we're here to help you cut through the noise and discover that the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Hosted by entrepreneur, author, public speaker, and regular media contributor Seth Denson. Subscribe, share, rank, and review. Welcome to Somewhere in the Middle on the Real News Communication Network.
Welcome. Man, I got to tell you, Zach, I'm excited about today's show.
It's got a slick sound so far, yeah. Solid start to a strong finish, I'm sure.
New tunes.
I like it. New VO.
You know, listen, this could be our best show yet. Definitely a top two.
Only time will tell.
I know, right? But I'm positive we're going to be in the top two rankings of our past shows. Welcome to the second edition of Somewhere in the Middle. I am Seth Denson. Thanks for joining us today on the Real News Communication Network. Joined, as always, in the booth by Mr. Apple Zackintosh himself.
How's it going?
Zach, thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, thanks for making me a part of this, Seth. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Excited about what we're going to be talking about today. What would it look like to have a 6-3 Supreme Court with 6 somewhat conservative justices versus 3? There's a lot of talk this week going on about Justice Kennedy deciding to step down and retire. Of course, President Trump has already been out there talking about the fact that he's going to nominate somebody that's going to be around until the second coming, I think was the talking point there. And we saw this in the 2016 election. It was very much about, the election was very much about who was going to be able to nominate some Supreme Court justices. And we all knew there was one, right? Because Scalia had already passed away, and the Republicans were able to, jockey Congress enough where that nobody was going to get confirmed by President Obama. So we knew that the election was going to be predicated on somebody was going to get a Supreme Court justice. Was it going to be Trump or was it going to be Hillary? But I got to tell you, the 2020 election, that's going to be top of mind because the Supreme Court is not getting younger. I got to think that the liberals and the Democrats are following Ruth Bader Ginsburg around with a bubble. We talk about 24-hour security surveillance.
Right.
This is a whole new side of it. I got to think that somebody, I feel that there's somebody walking around with the pillow waiting for, if she falls, to slide it underneath her.
Right. For half the country, Ruth Bader Ginsburg's personal trainer is like the 4th most important person in the world. Like, it's as good as it gets.
That's exactly right. So we're going to take that on today. And if we get to other things, we'll talk about them. I'm excited about the third segment. I'm going to go ahead and tease it now.
Yeah.
America's birthdays this week. 242nd? birthday.
It's pretty good.
Right?
Yeah.
Not doing quick math. Socks and shoes are still on. But
Back of the napkin stuff.
I think it's 242nd, right? I got a great idea for a birthday gift, and we'll talk about that in the third segment, or maybe second segment if the first segment just kind of keeps rolling. But we're excited about that. I'm also excited about our guests in studio today. I am joined by Scott Snellings. Scott is an attorney specializing in personal injury here. His practice focuses on helping those that have suffered serious catastrophic injuries. We were talking before the show. You've heard about the hammer?
I have heard about the hammer. Yes, I have.
Scott's the real deal, though. He's got the whole toolbox, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Scott's been a friend of mine for a couple years. I know his amazing wife, Sarah. I always talk about outpunting your coverage. Scott?
I have outpunted my coverage, and it's not even close.
Right. Listen, we are good friends because we are in good company
exactly.
in that realm. But 3 amazing kids, Emma, Olivia, Jacob. It's always fun. His kids are about the same ages as my kids, so it's fun to watch them get together and play. But really glad you're here, Scott.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Also joined by Matt Bowers. Matt's been a friend of mine for, Matt, almost 10 years now?
Yeah.
We met through work, really. I'm in healthcare. Matt's in healthcare. He's an insurance executive here in the Dallas market. But he's a provocateur of thought, I think is the best way to describe you, Matt.
Yes.
Matt and I have had a lot of conversations over the years, not just about healthcare, but about socio issues and political issues. And I was just really excited to have Matt on the show because he's someone that I think if we probably put things down on paper, we may be 50-50 on things that we maybe disagree or agree on if you just take them at, we'll call it face value.
Right.
But through our conversations, we've been able to come together somewhere in the middle. See what I just did there?
I like it.
That's
I like
good,
it.
right?
We're right in the
It's
middle.
like you've been doing this before.
I know, right? Show number 2. We gotta love it. But I thought Matt would be a great addition to the show just because he is spot on a lot of times on some of his thoughts. And so, Matt,
Cool.
thanks for being here.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Now, another kudos to Matt. I emailed him at 6 o'clock this morning and said, dude, I got to have you on my show. And to his credit, he cleared out his afternoon to join us. So thank you, man.
You bet, man.
Appreciate
Looking forward to it.
So, hey, listen, Justice Kennedy is done. He has heard his last case. He is
Written his last opinion.
Moving to Florida, I got to think, to play a lot of golf and sit on the beach and sip on some Mai Tais or whatever the drink is going on this day. Play a little bit of bingo. But where does that leave us, right? So 5-4 court, we got to think that President Trump's not going to nominate anybody that isn't going to be somewhat to the right of things. Scott, you're a lawyer. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, I think Trump is going to try to put the most conservative person that he can get by with up there. Now, remember, the Republican majority right now sits at 51. They have 51 senators. But remember also that McCain is treating for brain cancer right now. Also remember that Lisa Murkowski out of Alaska and Susan Collins out of Maine are not unwilling to break with the Republicans. So knowing that both of those ladies are pro-life or not pro-life, right?
Pro-choice.
Pro-choice. Yeah. I think Trump's got to be careful with who he puts up there.
Everything that I've heard this week has been surrounding Roe v. Wade. That seems to be at the top of everybody's list in having conversations. And I don't want to discount Roe v. Wade. I will infuse some opinion here. Again, not taking a side of pro-choice or pro-life, but I think we find ourselves in a very scary position when the courts who have made an opinion and a ruling, that those opinions and rulings could be overturned by the next court. That's my fear in all of this. Again, not taking a side on Roe v. Wade, but this fear that all these decisions, we can go Citizens United, we can go to a lot of other decisions that have been made out there, that we have set some potential precedents that whatever the court looks like 10, 20, 50, 100 years from now could totally outlaw or change what was done before. Let's take Brown versus Board of Education, right? Desegregation of schools. What would happen if a court came in today and said, yeah, you know what? It's not our opinions anymore. We're going to move this thing. Matt, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's part of how this is designed. As we grow as a nation, as times change, as things come along, there's going to be some of these decisions that might need to be overturned. Citizens United for me comes to mind right off the bat. I'd like to see less big money in politics. So that decision for me is one that we should probably reconsider at some point. But the idea behind this has been lost, in my opinion. There's a spirit to this that I think is missing. When this was, if you read the Federalist Papers and the ideas that the guys that wrote that put into it, Alexander Hamilton and those guys, it was the idea that the spirit of this was supposed to be not along political lines. That when this was supposed to be a part of this, that party affiliation, family affiliation, who you're in business with, any of those different, were not supposed to come into play into this. Mm-hmm. And that what the way it's supposed to work is that we come together as a group, right? Left and right come together to kind of come up with these folks that we can trust to make decisions based mostly on law and on what their heart and gut tells them to do, even if that means going against party lines. And we're seeing less and less of that, for sure, which I think is dangerous.
I agree with you. I think that as I look back at the courts and the current structure of the courts, let's take Kennedy still being on the court, for example, even though he's just retired. I've always liked Kennedy, and here's why. While there may have been rulings that have come down in the past that my own personal convictions or my own personal belief system was in conflict with the 5-4 ruling that may have come down with Kennedy being the swing vote, I always respected the fact that he bucked political alignments to say, listen, as I've looked at this law, or the Constitution and this case that is being heard, I have to take it on its merit and remove any personal bias I have to this. And so I think that he will be missed. I'm sad to see him go for that very reason. I mean, you got to think. So he was appointed by Reagan, obviously conservative.
Interestingly enough, appointed with a 97-0 approval. Will we ever see that again?
Yeah, not in today's world.
No.
But remember, too, that was Reagan's second choice.
It was. Bork, I believe. Was
Bork,
that.
That's right.
He was turned down because he was too conservative by Republicans. Think about that one.
Interesting. I didn't know that I knew that.
Yeah.
I knew that he was a second choice, but I didn't realize the reasoning.
Yep.
Interesting. 97-0.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, to your point, Matt, I don't know if that ever is going to happen again, at least not in our... I'm fifeful, never say never, right? For all you people out there that don't know what I was just referring to, American Tail, great cartoon. I have 2 kids. Cartoons are rampant in my house.
Don Bluth. Yeah, that's a good one.
Never say never, right? But no, I think that this is something that we need to have a real conversation about, because the fear that I have, again, if I find myself on the right side of things, right being my political stance, right? Not necessarily that I'm right, although we can take that one on as well. The fear that Republicans should have, or people on the right, is that the world is always changing, and just because you may have the gale force wind behind you in this moment does not mean in 10 or 15 years down the road it couldn't totally be shifted the other way, and we'll all be quick to scream, that we need true balance. Let's use that word balance. Let's talk about that. Scott, what do you think true balance means when it comes to the court system?
In terms of balance in the court system, I think it kind of alludes to what you talked about earlier, is having a diverse set of opinions on the court, right? Opinions that can represent both Republicans, Democrats, and a large portion of Americans that are somewhere in the middle. That aren't defined necessarily by party lines, but they're defined by issues. So, whenever you start talking about let's put the most conservative or let's put the most liberal judge on the Supreme Court that we can find, I don't necessarily know that that's the correct way to go about it. It seems to me the best way to go about it hey, let's find somebody who's well-reasoned, whose stance on how they interpret the Constitution we agree with, which I think is somewhat divided by party lines, right? Conservatives tend to be strict constructionists, while liberals tend to like a document that changes somewhat along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Evolving, yeah, and changes with the times. So I think, in terms of a party, justices shouldn't be pinned into whether they're conservative or whether they're liberal. They should be chosen based on how well they reason and what their conclusions look like and how they apply.
Right. Matt, what do you think on this? I
think he's correct. I mean, that's why they're appointed for life.
Sure.
Because if we get mad at them about something, who cares? They voted their conscience, I read a meme on Facebook where we get so much of our information these days, but I read a meme that said that if a bird is flapping its wings and one of those wings becomes more powerful than the other wing, it flies in circles. Yeah. It gets nowhere. And I think that's what we're in danger of. And with this just absolute polarization, where, like we were talking about earlier, just this line drawn in the sand, so much so that if someone that we support does something really horrible, we often don't feel like that we can speak up about that. And it didn't used to be that way. When Nixon did what he did, a nation decided this guy needs to go.
Yeah.
And I don't know that we have that ability right now, because there are so many people that will, and I've, you know me, Seth, I've gotten in trouble with left and right over the years. And at one time I was just torn apart for criticizing Obama, called a racist and all kinds of bad names. And now if I do the same thing to Trump, the guys on the other side do the same. I'm just in the middle getting beat up constantly. But that's okay, because I'm going to question the people in power.
Yeah.
And whoever's running the country right now, that's who I've got my questions for, not whoever was in last time. But who's here now, and what kind of decisions and what kind of actions, what kind of words are they using? That's how I judge who I support and who I don't support. It's not on some preconceived notion that I'm a Republican or a Democrat, so I have to support them, good, bad, or indifferent. I just think that's a really dangerous place that we've come to in our country that's done nothing but tear us apart as a country, and we have a really hard time coming together when we need to. Like if aliens were attacked, what would we do? I mean,
We'll take that on in another episode, maybe. I think we've just segued there. No, but I tend to agree with you. I remember my wife and I were talking about this, I think earlier this week. September 11th, right? Everybody in this room, we lived through that.
Yep.
Yes, we did.
I remember I was living in Abilene, Texas at the time, and I remember sitting in line to get gasoline because there was this fear of this run on gas. This was on September 11th, 2001, that I remember, all of the reports being, we don't really know what happened. It's a terrorist attack. And we could, the government's going to ration gasoline. We're going to war. Something major is happening here. And I remember sitting in line for over 2 hours to get gasoline. And how almost calm everyone in that line tended to be because of what had just happened. We came together in that moment. And it was, hey, listen, you know what? I'm going to let you cut in line here because I understand what you're going through. And I remember sitting in that line. Nobody was angry. Nobody was anxious. We weren't Republicans. We weren't Democrats. We weren't left. We weren't right. We were Americans. And in that moment, we came together. And what I hate is this idea that it takes this unrealistic tragedy to bring us together, to bring us to this place where we can say, listen, Let's find a way to work through this immense issue here. And to your point, Matt, I remember when President Obama was elected, not long after he was elected, I think it was to his first term, he was coming to Dallas, where we live. And they had set up for him to speak at a number of different schools. And a number of friends of mine took to social media and stated that they were going to be pulling their kids out of school because President Obama was going to be speaking. And I got knocked around a little bit because I challenged that. I said, wait a minute. You have a sitting president of the United States coming to speak to your children. We should all have been so lucky as kids to get to hear the voice of the President of the United States who wanted to spend 20 minutes with me to tell me about how much they love our country, about how we are the future, and how we need to come together. And that was ultimately the message that was going to come out of that. I seriously doubt that President Obama was going to take a policy issue to a bunch of 7-year-olds, right? But I was absolutely called out for being a leftist supporter, to which my response was, A, you don't know how I voted, but B, he is the President of the United States. And if he wanted to sit down with me, I'd take it. I'd take that meeting immediately. But we have gotten so far separated from listening to one another. And I think that social media plays a huge role in that, because I remember growing up, there was cable news. I think we had CNN, and towards the latter part, I think I was in high school or college before Fox News came around. But we all went to the same place to get information.
Yeah.
Right? Now, we can go wherever we want to get information, and we can be sure that information is only containing that which we want to hear, right?
Absolutely. It's your talking points, right?
It is, right? So I think it's a sad place. So kind of coming back around to the Supreme Court here, I got to tell you, I'm anxious to see who President Trump is going to nominate. I hope that in the end he nominates somebody who wants to look at the Constitution, wants to look at where we are as a society, and to your point, Matt, wants to look at the facts and say, what is right here? Not what is the party line position, but what is right. What say you guys?
His last appointment I was fine with.
Gorsuch?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought he's a pretty moderate judge, and looking at, his stances on things and stuff, I felt like not the worst choice ever, and Democrats voted for him.
And didn't he clerked for Kennedy, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So they're similar in my opinion. But, I mean, I'll admit, I was also fine with Garrick or
Merrick Garland.
Merrick Garland. I'm sorry.
I actually
Merrick
was
Garland.
too.
Yeah, and I think most Republicans would have been or should have been. And I think that was kind of a dangerous moment in our history where they kind of stonewalled, and that, in my opinion, flew in the face of the spirit of this process.
Yeah,
and of what the Federalist Papers talk about and so forth. And
I absolutely agree with you.
was, a big fan of the Federalist Papers and wrote a lot about that.
Yeah, Scott, you got thoughts on that one?
Yeah, politics has invaded every aspect of our lives now, right? And so when it comes to Supreme Court justices, that is the crown jewel in any president's administration. Is, if you get to choose one, that's great. If you get to choose two, that's incredible. And Trump has the potential opportunity to have three,
right?
And that's amazing. I mean, that is remaking a court right there.
Yeah.
So, I think that when a seat comes open, it should be voted on. That's what I thought back then. That's what I think now. And, quite frankly, a lot of my friends and contemporaries disagree with me, and that's fine. Yeah, that's fine.
To your point, Matt, I remember watching that play out when Obama had give me the name again, and I apologize.
Merrick Garland.
Merrick Garland. That's right. When Obama had nominated him and thinking through that, and I remember watching the speech he gave from the White House, that Garland gave from the White House, and go, I like this guy. I really do. I think that he's got his head on straight. Obviously, you don't get to be in that place unless you do. Right. Trump's not going to nominate my Uncle Willie, who is wearing the Make America Great Again hat. I don't have an Uncle Willie.
But would he if he had the chance?
Probably. But no, in all seriousness, and I thought, to your point, I thought this is a sad state when we can get stonewalled enough and wait to the election, and the whole narrative was, well, let's let the people decide. Well, no, that's not the way it was supposed to work.
That was one option. They chose not to go that direction.
That's right. That's right. I mean, and we have evolved in some ways. I mean, remember back in the first election, we nominated and elected a president, and nominated and elected a vice president, and they could have been from two very different ruling parties. Right. So we have evolved in some of those things. But to that point, I thought we did a great disservice not only to the courts, and this isn't a knock on Gorsuch, because I really like him, but we did a disservice to the structural process that has been around since the founding of our nation, when we said we are not going to allow a president to make his appointment and it to get an up or down vote in Congress, because we're going to let the people go vote on this. That's not the way it was structured to be.
Well, we have a system of checks and balances, and so we know that the president is going to be, lean towards their party. We know that Congress is going to be divided somewhat by party. So the third aspect of this checks and balances was supposed to be not that.
Right.
And by monkeying with that system, we've kind of got this one-winged bird that's almost about to happen here a little bit if we're not careful, that we can see that. Because I think one thing that's lost is that the president is once they're elected, is supposed to represent all Americans and do away with some of this division and try to bring America together a little bit. I think we've gotten further and further away from that, whereas at least this president still seems to be running for office, and there's something to be said for, I'm going to do the right thing for this country, for all Americans, regardless of party affiliation or any of that. And I just don't know that we have that right now, which is really disappointing and kind of scary in a way. But we have to hope that as a people, we're going to rise up and do better. That's what the founding fathers said, was that there's obviously going to be room for there to be manipulation in this, and that it could fall towards party lines. But we believe that there's going to be enough good people involved that consistently won't happen. And I don't know about that right now. I wonder,
I think that's the scary part. Right. I think that's what a lot of people, and again, I'm not taking a political angle on this. If you're on the right, you need to have I remember when President Obama was in office, and for the first few months of his presidency, before the midterms, he had the whole kit and caboodle, right? He had Congress, he had the Senate, he had the White House, and there was a lot of fear from the right as saying we could see a structural shift in what the United States is all about. Did it happen? No. It didn't. And so my encouragement, if you're on the left, is it didn't happen then. My hope is, to your point, Matt, that America is greater than one man, one party, or one policy, right?
Absolutely. I think that throughout the course of time, it'll show that one party in power typically doesn't stay that way for too long, right? Because they screw it up. They're going to screw it up, whether it's liberals, conservatives. If they all have all the power, they're going to take off enough people that it's going to be taken away from them.
Sure.
I just don't see that lasting for ages on end.
Yeah, so interesting stat. I was looking at the ages of the current justices. You have Sotomayor, who's 64, Kagan, who's 58, Ginsburg. I think Ginsburg's the linchpin right here, right? She's 85. And if you've, of course, I've followed politics for a long time. Ginsburg looks the same today as she did 20 years ago. So
Totally.
I always get a kick. They have the picture they take every year where they have all of the justices lined up. Do they intentionally go find her a rocking chair that's like 8 sizes too big for her to take that picture? It's like you can see everybody's black robes, and then you see this rocking chair behind her like she's Grandma Lucy on the front porch, just kind of rocking back and shouting things over the microphone.
Right.
But listen, Breyer. Right, he's 79. He's no spring chicken here, and then I got to think a lot of these folks are wondering about their golden year, so to speak. Do I want to really sit here for the rest of my life? Kennedy obviously just retired at 81. Judge Roberts is 63. Sam Alito, 68, and Thomas 70. But Gorsuch, 50 years old.
Right.
He's going to be there for a while.
He's definitely going to be there for a while.
So, do we think that President Trump is likely to nominate somebody 50 or younger over somebody that maybe is a better fit?
Well, I think he's stated that he's looking for somebody who can be around for decades.
Yeah.
I think every president looks for that, may not necessarily find it, but I think he's going to go with somebody young. I think he's going to go to somebody to appeal to his conservative base, certainly here before midterm elections, right? This confirmation hearing, he's going to try to get him pushed through before the midterm elections, before there's the potential that he loses his majorities there.
Sure.
So obviously he's going to try to find somebody to appeal to his base, and I think that's where the 2 senators that I mentioned at the beginning of the show come in. How far to the right can he go and keep his majority?
Yep. What do you think on that?
Yeah, I agree 100%. He's going to have to. He just cannot pander to his base completely. He's going to have to stay within the system a little bit, which tends to push towards a more moderate judge. And he could lose this thing, especially if they rush into it to try to beat the midterms and put somebody up that's not qualified or is not going to get through. That could be a big mistake. So I think his first choice, if he's going to try to beat the midterms, then needs to be kind of a slam dunk. If there's no such thing these days, but as close to that as he can get to, he's got to get those more moderate Republican senators on board with this. And if not, they'll stand against it. I do believe that.
Yeah, it'll be anxious to see what happens in the next week or two. I think that they'll make the announcement. Yeah. I would be shocked, actually, if we don't hear about it this week.
I think it's July 7th is when he said that the person he was going to be putting up, that's when he would announce it.
If we know one thing about President Trump, he's been staunch in sticking to his dates.
Yes,
right?
he has.
So we'll hear about who that is. I got to hope, and listen, if you're on the right or on the left on this, put away your political bias, and let's really hope that whoever's nominated is somebody who wants to hear all points of argument, wants to make a ruling based on constitutionality and what's in the best interest of the United States of America, not somebody who is going to just make a decision based on what is in the best interest of their political party.
Right. We can hope for that.
Good deal. Stay tuned. We'll be back for segment 2 of Somewhere in the Middle. We are back. Somewhere in the Middle. I am Seth Denson. I'm joined in the booth by Mr. Apple, Zach and Tosh. Zach, how are you?
Doing all right. Thanks for having me.
Good, good. Hey, we went a little long on that first segment. That's good, though.
That's right.
Good conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Got Scott Snellings of Snellings Law in the office.
Thank you, sir, for having me.
Studio. We'll call this the office for today.
Office, studio.
It's all the
This
same,
is your
right?
office.
For the next 10 minutes till I get kicked out. And Matt Bowers, Dynamic Insurance Services.
Yep.
Matt, thanks for joining in.
You bet, brother.
I thought it was a
Enjoying
good
this.
conversation.
I enjoyed it.
It was a great conversation.
It'd be nice to hear more stuff like that,
Wouldn't
quite
it?
frankly.
Man, could you imagine that coming out of
This
Washington?
is the kind of stuff you find somewhere in the middle.
Ah, look at that. I like it,
like
buddy. Real quick, we'll wrap up this second segment in the show today. I do want to get everybody's hot sports opinions on Maxine Waters. Obviously, that was top of the headlines for a couple of days until Kennedy decided he was going to go ahead and retire. But last week, Congresswoman Maxine Waters out of California came out effectively encouraging her supporters as she's at one of her own rallies or town halls to harass, so to speak, anybody in the Trump administration, right? Listen, I got kids, right? And one of the things we're always talking about with our kids is being kind to others. And we talk about responsibility. Have we come to a place where our elected officials, and by the way, the right was just as guilty of this during the Obama years. So I'm not separating a party line here. Right. But have we come to a place in our society where it's okay that somebody who is an elected official is telling people to harass somebody from the other party, throw them out of restaurants, and just effectively make their lives miserable? What say you guys on this?
Absolutely not. That'll never be acceptable, not in my eyes. We're human beings. We have certain responsibilities in how we treat each other, and the whole hashtag civility movement, I think, has been ended during this.
Yeah, that was short-lived.
Very short-lived, yes. And it's just quite frankly, it's so childish. Have your opinions, be able to back them up logically, and if somebody disagrees with you, okay. Yeah. Move on down the road.
I was reminded this week about that time that President Reagan was giving his State of the Union address, and someone from the Democratic Party screamed out in the middle of it an obscenity and really called him out. Oh, wait a minute. No. That was Obama. That's right. I forgot about that. But haven't we lost this level of mutual respect for one another, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been kind of building towards this for a while where, public officials feel very comfortable, especially with social media these days. They can kind of do it behind a typewriter behind a typewriter. Wow, I just showed my age. Behind a keyboard and, not have to face immediate repercussions. But I will say this, and, I try to stay in the middle on these things as much as possible, but this president has set a precedent of saying outrageous things, encouraging people at his rallies to, become, I don't necessarily violent, but certainly offer to pay their legal fees if they did hurt someone in the crowd, things of that nature. He is our leader, right. And I watched Obama. I voted for Obama the first time, did not vote for him the second time. I'm not some worshiper of these guys. And I did see a president in Obama and in the past presidents like Reagan, who I loved and voted for, handle themselves in a way that was a good example for people of both parties and for us as citizens on how we speak to each other. But we have a president that uses dangerous, hateful language and who encourages bad behavior in some ways. I think that really begins to lead us into this uncivil discourse in a whole new way, because now Maxine Water goes, well, the president can say things of this nature. I could certainly. And that's a big problem we've got into our country in general. It's like when you get onto your kids and you tell your one kid, hey, don't throw the remote control anymore. And they look at their brother and go, yeah, but he stepped on it yesterday. Right. Okay, everyone's tearing up the remote control. Stop it, both of you.
It's about the remote control.
Right. And I hear that all the time in discussions I'm involved with where I'll be saying something about this administration. They're like, well, what about Obama? He is not the president anymore. Yeah. Let's talk about what's going on today, right now, And so this feeling of the ability to use hateful, angry language, I think we need to address it at the very, very top first.
Sure.
And say, Mr. President, it's not okay for you to talk that way and say those things because you're making a bad example for children, Maxine Waters, and everyone else in this country.
Wasn't it Truman that used to have the sign on that the buck stops here, right?
Yeah.
And right now it seems like the buck is,
floating around.
It's on Twitter somewhere.
Yeah.
Right? No, because I agree with you. I think that we have come to this place where, I even think with my kids, as we start to look up to our elders and people that are in the public spotlight, do I want my kids looking at the things that President Trump is saying and say, well, no, there is your, there's your leader. There's the person to take your P's and Q's. No, absolutely not. Now, we have to separate why President Trump was elected and some of the policy issues, but unfortunately, he hasn't been able to separate the rhetoric from that and take a level of civility himself. And I'm hopeful that he will. He's got 2.5 years plus still left in his first term. I think we are probably as my daddy would say, spitting in one hand and wishing in the other, and
Exactly.
seeing which one's going to fill up first. He
Yep.
didn't say spitting, but I've cleaned it up a little bit there.
I hear you.
Right, but
Oh, West Texas saying.
right. I do wish that we would find ourselves in a place where we're having where our leaders are being that. They're being leaders again. And there has to be a level of statesmanship and
Respect for the
responsibility
office
and respect.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, but at the same time, I mean, look at their constituency, right? How does their constituency communicate? And so they're tending to take on the traits of their constituency. And I mean, Trump is a perfect example of that, right?
Yep.
I mean, look at his constituency and how they communicate and go after each other. Same thing on the liberal side. And I think, the leaders tend to take on the characteristics of their constituents or their population.
Yep. Nope. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, just whatever it takes to get elected and to stay in office. And I think that's a really bad mindset. It should
totally
be,
agree.
I'm going to do the right thing and say the right thing, and if you don't like it, then elect someone else next time.
Yep. Goodness. Well, hey guys, thanks for being with me today.
Oh, thank you for having us.
This has been
It was
fun.
awesome.
You guys come back?
bet.
Absolutely.
Matt, I'll give you more than 4 hours notice next time. But listen, big thanks to all the folks here at Real News Communication Network, Jeff Curley and everybody here. Zach, as always, man, couldn't do it without you.
Thanks. Yeah,
No,
it's a lot of fun.
Literally, I couldn't. You have to hit the
All
go
right.
button. But
All
the board
right. Yeah, I
operator.
got it. Okay. Well, thank
I
you,
wouldn't
Seth.
want to
Yeah.
do it without you either,
Yeah.
though. No, thanks. Another big thanks to somebody that's not on camera that does a lot for this show. Andrew Clark is my right hand. Really helps with a lot of the content writing and thought-provoking process as we think through the show each week. So, Andrew, always a big thanks to you, buddy. My beautiful wife and kids, you're my reason. Thanks for letting Daddy go do this for an hour or so a week and get it out of his system. I think my wife likes that I get it out of my system.
Aw,
Because
yeah.
then I don't come home and do it.
I should hope so.
But to Scott, to Matt, you guys on any social media, Twitter, anything like that you want people to follow you on?
Yeah, at Scott Snellings. I was one of the first ones to get that name, thankfully.
Well done.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ooh.
Well done, Matt.
Yep, Matt Bowers on Facebook mostly, and we have our website, www.mydynamic1.com.
Beautiful.
And if you're looking for a good life insurance policy, we're always there to help you out with that.
There he is. I like it, man. I like it. And if you get injured in a car accident,
Please call me.
call the toolbox. Don't call the hammer. Right?
That's Snellings Law PC.
That's right. You'll find Mr. Zach at Apple Zackintosh. That's plug 3
That's me.
on the day. I'm
Thank
gonna
you.
keep giving an over/under on
Yeah.
this. And you can find me at Seth Denson on Twitter. So the final segment today, or final part of the second segment, I should say, is something I always like to do, and it's really in trying to wrap this whole thing up with a bow. And I thought a lot this week about America's birthday. July 4th is coming up right around the corner. By the time this posts the podcast, it's probably going to be July 4th. And so while I may be considering a number of things, I do know where I land on this. My young daughters are ages 2 and 4, thus in the midst of what we call a constant state of birthday season. As parents, my wife and I have been working to teach our kids what it means to celebrate another's birthday. You want to honor that person. Make the day about them and not about you. Be respectful of their celebration. And part of celebrating one's birthday oftentimes means that we give gifts. For kids, we often give toys, or for significant others, we're likely going to give something a bit more romantic. But what would you give a country? This week will mark the United States' 242nd birthday. As we think about honor, respect, and a potential gift, I've got one lined up for us all to give. For this gift, you don't have to go shopping. As a matter of fact, you can simply just put your name on the card I've already gotten and go in on the gift with me. How about that? So what's the gift, you might ask? Listening. Let's do a little less talking and a little more listening. Not a lot, just a little. Both sides of the aisle agree that Congress doesn't do this, right? Don't believe me? Just turn on C-SPAN and watch who isn't in the room when someone from Congress takes the floor to opine on their position. But it doesn't stop there. Neither the granola-eating hippies on the left or the basket of deplorables on the right are having any effect. And why is that? Because the other side isn't listening. So here's a political gesture that we can do for our significant other, and by that, I mean this great country that we all share. For the folks on the right, turn off Fox News for a day and instead listen to CNN or MSNBC for an hour or two. And no, not in a what is the enemy saying kind of way. Rather, let's listen to the opposing points of view shared on those networks. Liberal thinkers out there have had some pretty good ideas that we can likely agree on over the years. More education money for our children, that was President Johnson. Overcoming the Soviet blockade of Berlin, that was President Truman. And creating one of the greatest fighting forces in the world, the U.S. Navy SEALs, that was President Kennedy. Hoo-yah. And if you're a lefty, a little Glenn Beck goes a long way. Very little, but a little. Conservative government was responsible for some outstanding things over the years. Large-scale desegregation of public schools, that happened under President Nixon. Promotion of alternative fuels to reduce U.S. dependence on foreign oil, President George W. Bush Jr. Yes, W., Texas oil man, despite what you might have heard, he was the one who set aside his own conservative leanings to encourage alternative fuel sourcing. And oh, by the way, making NASA a civilian space agency under the Science Education Act, that was President Dwight D. Eisenhower. But I'm principled in my beliefs, you might say, as a response, to which I would tell you that being principled doesn't mean being right. The Taliban is principled. So were the Nazis. So for the day, let's just lay down our principles and instead perk up our ears and listen to one another. We have achieved greatness when we have participation from both sides. Republican Air Force Colonel Eileen Collins commanded the Space Shuttle Discovery with ground support found in Texas, a red state. But you can be sure that most of those folks in ground control likely attended schools at liberal universities such as MIT, Harvard, Berkeley, and Yale. We do great things when both parties come together. We touch the sky. And on that note, this 4th of July, look to the sky and enjoy the fireworks. I assure you that most of those fireworks were likely built by a conservative ordnance explosive expert in an armory, while at the same time they are assuredly launched by an expert with a liberal theater pyrotechnics degree. Teamwork makes the dream work. Finding myself somewhere in the middle, I'm Seth Denson.